Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Good evening, good night, good morning, whenever you happen to be jumping in on this session. I was looking at what we have left to do in this overall presentation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to split it into two. So the first part is I'll do now, and that'll be available on Monday the 6th. And then the last section of the module of this presentation, which deals specifically with risk assessment models, I'm going to leave that until because some of the risk assessment models, I'm going to leave that until Monday the 13th, and we will have that as a normal class. We'll wrap it up that way, rather than trying to rush through everything now to get the rest of the material done. So this is where we kind of finished last Monday. I apologize if my voice is a bit funny. I've picked up a cold or a flu or the plague or something in the last couple of days, and it's just making me a little bit stuffy. So one of the biggest hazards I find, and I've come across it in a number of different things, is this labeling. People not paying attention to labeling, to companies not paying attention to what they're doing, misinformation in labels. And sorry, misinformation is the wrong word. It's not misinformation. It is accurate information. It is a lack of information clarity. It's a lack of consideration in the design phase to ensure people know what they're looking at. So, for example, if I were to hand you a blue label bottle of water, you would expect that water to be still water. If I hand you a green labeled bottle of water, you would expect that water to be sparkling water, because it is almost globally expected now that blue labeling is still and green labeling is sparkling, regardless of brand. That has changed. You have brands coming out like Ishka and others that do not follow that trend. And it means we've got to spend more time looking for a small little piece of text on a label that says whether it's still or sparkling. The same as here in this image that we looked at briefly last Monday. We have 5 boxes of tablets here, and there's 3 different types of tablet here. They're all by the same manufacturer. They're all essentially the same brand, Voltarol. We've got 25 milligram, 25 milligram, 50 milligram, and 75 milligram tablets. We have, I'll just zoom in a little bit so we see the labels and I can read it myself. We have diclofenic potassium. We have diclofenic sodium, and we have sodium PHEUR, and we have just diclofenic sodium. We have Voltarol Rapid, Voltarol Rapid, Voltarol tablets, Voltarol tablets, Voltarol SR tablets. Now, they are quite possibly, more than likely, because they're different actual names, they're more than likely 3 completely different, or they are completely different products. First thing, if we're not paying attention, we have a huge hazard here, a huge risk here, that a patient is going to get the wrong tablet. I remember seeing a TV series some time ago, and I think it was something like Scrubs, the comedy TV hospital series, where a patient was about to be given or had been given a medication, and instead of being given 10 milligrams or something, they had been given 100 milligrams, because whoever wrote up the prescription put a smiley face after the 10, and somebody read that as a 0. It's so simple to get it wrong. Think these tablets are sometimes okay in a pharmacy, your high street pharmacy. We don't actually think of it. We say, "Oh, they should have just read the label." In a pressure situation, you may not be able to read the label. In a hospital situation, you're giving a patient medication at night. The ward is dark because the light they're just don't have necessary lights. You're as we are well aware, your medical staff are shattered. They're tired. My sister-in-law works as a she works in kind of one of these I suppose what they call a halfway home for elderly and recovering patients. And she runs she's regularly on a 72-hour shift. That's 72 hours technically on duty, where she is living in the house, the halfway house, with the residents, patients, whatever you want to call them, and she is responsible for their health. She is responsible for their medication, their feeding, their exercise, their everything. And having to read a tablet box like this, when you're tired, when a patient is angsty or is angry or is in urgent need of medication, it's easy to pick up uh, the wrong thing. It's very easy to pick up the wrong thing. It's very easy to issue out the wrong one when you may have both in the trolley, in the medical trolley, the medicine trolley. These are the risks that sometimes when we're designing products we don't see. These risks get dealt with in design phase. They should not be allowed to happen. And particularly when you're looking at big companies who easily have the money to just change a color on a box. 25 mil tablets are yellow. The 50 mil tablets are a completely different color. It's not a major issue. Having worked in product development and been involved with artwork and stuff like that, I know it's not that difficult. You just pick another color, and that becomes part of the artwork for the 50 milligram tablets over the. We used to have it in products where blue wrappers were for what's called pale product, unsmoked products. Brown wrappers were for smoked product. Green wrappers were for cured product. And it didn't matter what way the process was done. There was a standard base color coordination to identify the product. Now we're just talking about basic products, pale versus smoked. This is something that these are medications that can actually kill somebody if we don't get it right. So it's important, that within our businesses that we are paying attention to the small details, because a small detail can become a major risk. And that is not just a risk to the job, but a risk to someone's life. It's a hazard. It's a problem waiting to happen. It doesn't matter. It can be somebody in a hurry, stores product in the wrong place. I mentioned about the aircraft situation last Monday. The screws just marginally narrower than they should have been. They're one size narrower. An eighth of an inch, a 16th of an inch, whatever, might say is nothing. Somebody used to say to me in the past when I said this is only a small little piece, they said, put it on the end of your nose and see what you notice it. Put that much on the end of your nose and see what you notice it. And if you notice it, well, then it is an issue. And that's the thing here. We can all, you can read in red quite clearly it's a 25 or a 50, but the small print underneath it is actually quite different. read it in a hurry in a dark ward in a hospital, and they're all Voltarol tablets. And at 25, what about the 50? At 25, looking at it in a hurry can look very like a 75. And a 75 can look very like a 25. Straight away, you have the risk of giving somebody a third of their dose and therefore having zero effect on the treatment, or you have the risk of giving somebody 3 times their dose and risk killing them because you overdose them. When we see like this, and we see it in medical situations, we say, "Oh yeah, that's lethal. We shouldn't do that." That shouldn't be allowed to happen. But this is not just the area where things like that can happen. As I said about the aircraft, we can have the wrong size screw, which causes the cockpit window to fly out once it goes above a certain height, and the pilot is almost killed. If he had actually been taken out the window completely, if it wasn't for his belt or foot getting caught on the steering, on the yoke, or in the belt, and somebody grabbing him and holding onto him, if he had actually gone out, he would have gone back along the top of the fuselage and probably into one of the engines, because they were both attached to the tail. So he would have been killed. But the chances are it would have also flamed out the engines, or at least one of the engines, and possibly caused the whole aircraft to crash because of a screw. Another one I spotted, again to do with the air incident, and this one did result in fatality. Pilots fighting an aircraft. They themselves, they proved that they fought the aircraft all the way to the ground. And what happened was somebody decided that we could get away with not doing as frequent checks on a kind of a large screw and bolt mechanism that controlled the ailerons on the back of the aircraft, which were high mounted on the top of the wing, or top of the tail. And basically, because they weren't being checked that often, it wasn't greased as it should have been greased up. It stripped down the thread on the bolt, which essentially made the whole thing just fall apart. And once that happened, the pilots had zero control. The plane inverted, the plane just literally plummeted into the ocean at something like 250, 300 miles an hour. Again, there is something that somebody made a decision. We don't have to service it as often as we are. We can save a bit of money by not servicing it as frequently as we have been. We can get away without that. And that's something I have heard in operations. That's something I've heard in factories I've worked in the depots I've worked in the bus companies I've worked for. That's something I've heard over and over again. We get away without it for a while. Sure, it'll do another while before we do anything about it. It's going fine, sure, leave it. And we don't actually conduct a hazard analysis of that. We just write it off. That's grand. We need those machines for preventive maintenance next week. You can't have them. We're coming out of a bank holiday weekend. We need full production all week. There's a promotion running. Have to have it. But they're overdue. They're overdue a service. No, you can't have them. We need to have them. We're going to be producing on them. So they're going fine. There's no problems with them. Production people, have you any problems on those machines? No, they're running fine. Okay, we're going to leave it run as it is. And then at some point, you may hear, why are we doing production that the machine stopped? Machine broke. And we're going to see it again and again. Switch back to healthcare. You hear people complaining time and time again that they can't get appointments with their GPs. We have huge waiting lists in hospitals on trolleys because just waiting for treatments, waiting for triage, waiting for checkups, waiting to be tested. I have to get a monthly prescription. I contacted my GP in January as my prescription. I was on my last prescription. I said, right, I need to get another prescription. Normally, I would go to my GP every 6 months and I'd get some blood tests done and I'd get the usual checkup done and she gives me the prescription and we're all happy. On this occasion, I just put the thing out there. Look, I know you're up to your tonsils. I need a prescription. So let me know what you want to do. And I contacted him a week later and was told, oh yeah, we sent a 6-month prescription to your pharmacy. So you're good to go for the 6 months. No checkup, no bloods, nothing. Now I know that to me that's grand. It cost me 20 quid for a prescription instead of 60 quid for a GP visit. But at the same time, I'm not taking medication because I have a habit of, there's the fun piece that I'm taking Smarties, not just because I have a thing about taking medications. There's a need for me to take them. There's a need for me to have regular blood checks. There's a need for me to go through this process. I would prefer not to be. So technically, there is a hazard. The prescription was issued without being seen. If something changed in the last 6 months since I previously saw the doctor, that's not going to get picked up now until possibly middle of the summer, when I might get to go if things have calmed down, when I might get to go for the relevant tests and checkups. That's a hazard. The reason I'm pointing it out is not to give a life story, but to basically show that it's all around us. We can be very bad and very complacent in our attitude towards potential hazards and risks. And you pick any industry and you'll find it. You'll find an issue. And that needs to be managed and protected. Just a dog to his nut here. Just give me 30 seconds and I'll come back. Apologies, folks. Not what I intended. I'm on my own here at the moment, and I have 2 dogs, and one of them has decided that right in the middle of this, she decided she had to go out. So you're all important to me, but there's no way I'm cleaning up dog mess off my floor. Right. So we'll continue. So just point out, the dangers that we have and the complacency that we have. It's a wonder there's not more chances or not more issues. I said last week these were 3 vials of a liquid. One was sterilized water, and the other one was a sodium chloride or something, which was actually identical to each other. The vials looked identical. Unfortunately, we have a couple of ways of managing and identifying and dealing with risks. And the first one is retrospective. Unfortunately, as we talked last week about the aviation industry, this is where we have an awful habit of. This is where we seem to conduct most of our lessons, most of our learnings. It's the retrospective. If we wait until things have happened, we are, for the victims, we are closing the barn door after the horse is bolted. We are essentially, nothing's going to happen until it happens. We talked last week about the MAX 8 planes crashing. Nothing happened. There was nothing grounded. Aircraft were only grounded. There was 2 crashes, at least one near miss. But it was only when aviation authorities started banning 737 MAX 8s over their airspace that, as Europe started that Boeing eventually woke up. And once that can of worms was opened, it was realized just how big and bad the issue actually was. But the fact is, it took 300 and odd people to lose their lives before anything was done. And that, unfortunately, is what happens. We drive along our roads, not so much, it's supposed to on the back roads, not so much on the motorways. We drive along our roads and used to come across a black spot area. Don't see them as much anymore, but used to find a black spot area, which is an area where there had been fatalities, road fatalities. In other words, somebody had to lose their life before it was highlighted that there was a problem, that this part of the road is dangerous. That's not necessarily the way we should be learning things, but it is the way we do learn things. It's what triggers action, retrospective, lessons learned, accidents and incidents, things that should not be allowed to happen, things that should not have happened, but did happen. It's these unforeseen events that have all of a sudden become foreseen events. They have become the events that actually drive us to wake up and say, well, we have to make sure that doesn't happen again. In that situation, there's a panic then put in with the health and safety people, the inspectors, the auditors, the people who are watching, to actually hurry and get a solution. And sometimes the solution becomes a bit of overkill, maybe seen as too much or seen as too little too late. It is a thing we should learn from. Yes, we learn from the past. But we should also work out, as part of that, is get to the bottom of what caused it, because very often our lessons learned become a knee-jerk reaction to an element of what happened. We may not actually go back to the actual cause, the root cause. We might decide to just go for the resolve the victim's situation. We're going to jump to a causal response rather than going into the detail. Something has gone wrong. It's gone wrong for a reason. And we should use that to get to the bottom of what happened. And then use that to learn the lessons, to make sure it doesn't happen again. We can, of course, look forward. We can start looking at what could go wrong. We can take a prospective view rather than a retrospective view. We can anticipate what can go wrong. We can start looking at reporting systems. Quality management uses various methods of capturing data and mapping that data so they can see if things are starting to go out of kilter, go outside specification, so they can actually then take proactive responses to deal with what has gone wrong. They can't do that or if they, well, they'll do it. Sorry, they will do it if and when something does go wrong. They will knee-jerk reaction to get it resolved. But as they're watching the stats, it's statistical process control. It's called SPC, and SPC basically means we are watching what's happening. I used to record production data for each of our main production departments every day and report it at the management meeting every morning. And we would see the daily trends as we built up each week. And at the end of the week, we would have a weekly trend. So what do we do last week? What do we do this week? And if the figure is down, we would be able to have an analysis of that. We could say, okay, why are these figures down? What happened last week versus this week? Why are you down on this pre? Why did production yesterday, why was it down on the production today or the day before? And what's been done to make sure that we're back on track? It's trying to anticipate what's going to happen. It's anticipating, are we going to be in trouble with a bank holiday weekend coming? This is our first time doing a bank holiday weekend. Well, it's not actually, it's our second time doing a bank holiday weekend this year, but the first one was kind of caught up with the Christmas rush. The second one, this is our first kind of unencumbered one this weekend. So there'll be meetings in food production and various other organizations, manufacturing organizations. Are we covered for the bank holiday? Is there anything likely to come up and bite us? Any events that are likely to cause us a problem that we have to watch out for? Looking at, are people going to be on the roads much? Is there going to be a lot of traffic? A lot of people going home for the weekend, long weekend. Any events going on around the country, any festivals or anything happening for St. Bridget's Day that we need to be aware of? What can go wrong? So you're looking at anything including near misses, any sort of reported hazard. I see actually today, this is Sunday, and I just literally before I came into this to do this, I saw a report of Dublin Airport yesterday and today have had to close and divert flights about 40 minutes or so each time, 40, 50 minutes, because of illegal drone activity in and around Dublin Airport. It's illegal to fly a drone within 5 kilometers of an airport. And here you have some idiots flying drones around the airport. And the crazy thing is the demands of the airlines for Eamon Ryan to do, as the transport minister, to do something about it. I'm not sure what they expect him to do, chase him on his bicycle or something. But there is legislation there. The government have done their bit. It's illegal. I think you need people out on the airport perimeter with shotguns, or some airports have eagles and hawks. If they see a drone, they attack it and disable it. This country will probably then find the government has been sued for damaging somebody's drone. But the prospective risk assessment is, how are we going to proactively deal with the hazard? Clearly somebody, people know it's illegal to fly planes or fly drones near airports. I think there's even signs around some of the perimeter fences of airports, do not fly a drone near here. And people still do it, which means they're doing it on purpose. Common sense will say there's planes taking off and landing. You don't put a drone anywhere in the vicinity of that. So people may not be identifying the risk, or if they are, they're ignoring the risk, and therefore other people then have to identify the hazard that could be caused by that. The ensuing hazard that we have to deal with from that. And basically it's this: if something happens, is that an unforeseen situation? No. Therefore, it's not an accident. It is a hazard that was waiting to happen, or a risk that was waiting to happen. And we have to be able to manage those. We've got people in various classes looking at in various areas, looking at different types of issues in terms of remote working, productivity, mental health, complacency, and that is the one word that keeps coming up when I look at things like hazard or risk analysis. It's the one thing that keeps coming back. Complacency. Complacency means we do nothing until something happens. And I don't know, is it a cultural thing in this country? Is it a global thing? This concept of, it might never happen. You're only wasting money doing protecting against that because. Or, yeah, you'll protect against that element, but sure, it'll happen. Something else will happen instead. You're only going to push it further or push it underground or whatever. There's this complacency against what might or mightn't happen, but there's also this bigger issue of wasting time, wasting money. Money could be better spent, whatever. All these things that could be done differently to, instead of wasting money on all this unnecessary risk analysis. There's a number of this, and these are mostly again designed for the health. The NHS uses a lot of these. This whole part of the report comes from the NHS. Just to remind you of that. At our session next week, we'll be looking at some of these in more detail, like the FMEA, FEMEA. I think we've got a helicopter landing in my flipping garden. We'll be looking at that in the near or next week. HACCP, most you're probably familiar with most of these. You could probably tell me more about these things if this was a live class than me telling you. We have HACCP used across the board in food sector, in medical health sectors, in a lot of industries. We have HACCP controls, hazard and critical control points, and in some cases they're ignored. It's one of the things that there's an element in every organization. This is not down to any specific company. There's an element in every organization that if there's a rule, we're going to find a way to beat it. We're going to find a way not to have it, not to do it. And so, can I beat this? There's also hazard and operability studies. There's probability risk assessments. There's structured what-if techniques, which is probably one of the simplest ones. There's human error analysis and reduction techniques. There's let's see, HRA techniques. There's technique for human error. And predict error predictions. There's Sherpa, which is the systematic human error reduction and prediction approach. There's generic error modeling system. There's the influence design error analysis system. There are multiple, and this is just a few of them. There are multiple techniques, and this in itself is part of the problem. Every day there's another one. Every week, every month, there's another one that we're trying to do. Are there too many? People come from different jobs, different sectors into the job, and they bring the different level things with them. Oh no, we don't use that one. We do this one. So I'm going to do that one here. All of a sudden, everybody's going to have to get used to a new one. I find this one much better because, and all of a sudden, we might be using 2 or 3 or 4. That's paperwork. That's admin tasks. That's more chaos. It's more uncertainty. It's more people not knowing what the heck are we doing today. There's a concept in business strategy and business planning called paralysis by analysis. And we can spend our lives gathering data for analysis to the extent that we never actually do anything. And this is the risk here. There's an acceptance that we have to make, and this is, again, leads to the complacency, I believe, or at least some of the complacency, I believe, and that is that we will never identify all the risks or all the hazards. There's always going to be things we haven't spotted. Always going to be things that we haven't spotted. And we have to accept that. We cannot account for every single type of error and every single type of risk. And when we have that in the back of our heads, that brings the question, why should we be analyzing these things? Why should we be looking for these things? Because the chances are, if anything does come to bite us, it's going to be something that we hadn't planned on or hadn't seen, hadn't foreseen. So therefore, all the work we're doing is a waste of time because we're still not going to catch the one that actually takes us out or that causes the problem. It's a bit doom and gloomy when you break it down and start really getting philosophical about it. Fact is, we have to manage our systems. We have to manage what's going on, minimize the risks that we know about, eliminate the risks we know about, identify the hazards, as many as we can, and address them in order of importance. We look at some of the remedies now. We look at the balance of them next week. And there are a lot of methods. This is, as I said, is part of the problem. A lot of them are developed in other industries. And because they're developed in other industries, they get adopted and adjusted and in other ways realigned to make them fit into the industry that we're now going to try to fit them. The example here for healthcare, a lot of them come from other industries. People might be familiar with, even, in quality management, we have Six Sigma. People say, I'm a black belt Six Sigma, I'm a green belt Six Sigma. Great. Six Sigma was developed, if I remember rightly, for the IT sector. Now it's used everywhere. In supply chain, there are two primary models for supply chain. There's the SCORE, which is the Supply Chain Operational Reference, which is designed by the Supply Chain Council for supply chain. But there's also EFQM, popular use as a model for supply chain. EFQM is the European framework for quality management. It has technically got nothing to do with supply chain, but it's been adapted to be used. And this is the thing, when we're looking at these risk assessments, we're looking at what other industries do. You're doing your research, your dissertations. One of the things you'll be doing your literature review is looking at what's happening in other industries, and then adapt, and then using that as possibly to identify, well, would that work for us, to see what happens. Some of it works, some of it doesn't. Some are quantitative and some are qualitative. Quantitative research is your surveys, you're filling out forms. Quantitative research, some will say, is the most accurate because it's the mathematical one. But in actual fact, it's also the hardest one to get responses to. It's a survey. It's checklists on a feedback sheet. I mean, if you go for a meal and they have the little cards on the table for your feedback, or you go to a hotel and in the room there's this little card on one of the lockers for a little checklist for feedback. Do you fill it out and supply it? Does everybody fill it out and supply it? Do you pay attention to the questions? Or do you just check, and stick it in a box? Quantitative is sometimes seen as an inexact situation. It can be quite subjective. It can be very subjective. Qualitative is slower, and it's impossible to get the response from everybody. Qualitative, quality, relies on direct communication, so it relies on conversation. The problem with qualitative is you can't, as I say, interview everyone. If you're looking for your research, for your own research, your dissertations, quantitative, you will be required to possibly look for numbers, certainly in the high tens, possibly into the hundreds. Qualitative, you'll get away with less than 10. Because the qualitative takes longer. Qualitative can be more subjective insofar as everyone has their own opinion and it can be hard to assimilate and get the links between the points being made by each people. Your questions have to be very careful. The information has to be very careful. You have to be careful how you gather, how you ask a question, so that there's a commonality in the way the questions are being put forward. How do you combine factors? How do you bring things together? How do you score things? And as we'll see when we're looking at some of the models, there are areas where it's a bit grey as to how we actually categorize and measure things. And that in itself weakens the model, weakens the measurement, or can weaken the measurement. The point here, I suppose, overall is we are trying to identify hazards and risks. And we've been doing this since we came out of the cave and picked up the club. We have been, as our animal instinct, our fight or flight, which is still in us, the limbic system, the lizard brain is called. It goes right back to the reptile brain, right back to the earliest part of our being. Animal instinct. We are always assessing risks and hazards. Is it safe to do this? Is it not safe? But we also use our own personal barometers. We filter information on a behavioral basis. We filter information independently. Because what our filters are this comes from NLP, neuro linguistic programming. Our filters look at everything that we have had in our life, all the experiences in our life. It looks at our upbringing. So attitudes of our parents, of our friends, of our schoolmates, of our colleagues as we started working, all of those attitudes impact how we now act. All of them. We look at how it all shaped our views. What incidents have we encountered ourselves? What accidents have we had? The old saying, once bitten, twice shy. We walk along, we see a sign for wet paint. Watch a sign for wet paint. Put a sign for wet paint out, and watch how many people will actually go and touch the paint, the wall, or the seat, or the table, or whatever that the paint sign is on. And the person who has touched it and it has been wet and got paint on their fingers, they won't be, if they see the sign in another place, they won't touch it. Why? Because last time I touched that, my fingers got destroyed in paint. That it's wet paint, I'm not going to touch it. Until I know that sign has been there for several hours. And then I might touch it to see is it still tacky. But first go, I won't. I'll leave it there for a passage of time before I touch it again. Or before I touch it at all. Why? Because I know what happened the last time I did that. Our programming is changing. So our identification of the hazard is changing. We base it on our experience, but that's a very slow process, and that's not suitable for industrial applications. If that's the case, you'll have people going up scaffolding in flip-flops. And until they drop something on their foot, they're not going to come in tomorrow with steel cap boots. But after they drop something on their foot, they'll be wearing steel cap boots. They'll be wearing hard hat. They'll be wearing harnesses once things go wrong. Some people will have the complacency comes from experience, comes from a lack of something going wrong. I don't know why they have all these rules. They're only rubbish. I've heard people talk about how wearing seatbelts in a car, which has been a legality, a legal requirement for, I think, decades at this stage. There are people who still go around without seatbelts on. So much so that some cars now won't actually move if the seatbelt isn't on. If you don't have your seatbelt on, the car physically will not move. If it picks up that there's a presence in the driver's seat, but the seatbelt hasn't been clicked, then the car won't budge. So the decisions of what we check and how we check is difficult. What model we adapt, how easy is it to use, what way is it gathering information, and what is the accuracy or otherwise of that information? What exactly is it going to tell us? And how will it help us? Will it convince people to do what we want them to do? The National Patient Safety Association, which is the NPSA, they have two approaches. They have the Patient Safety Research Fund, which is a long-term research to identify the best methods for healthcare. And that takes over 2 years to produce a toolbox that they can then use. That's over 2 years just to get it set up. And there's a fast track, pragmatic approach to keep things moving and to keep things, safe in the short term. So, when we're looking at a risk assessment, and again, these are all things that you guys are going to be fairly used to involving what you already do. We have 4 basic questions. What can go wrong? From what can go wrong, there's 2 questions. How bad could it be? And how often can it happen? And from the answers to those, we ask ourselves, well, is there a need for any action? And if so, what? So it says 4 questions. It's actually 4, with the final one being a part A and a part B. Is there something we need to do differently? But we start at the beginning. What can go wrong? It's a very hard question to in the cold light of day. Can be a hard one to answer. When everything is going perfectly, it can be very hard to identify something that can go wrong. And if someone does come up with the what can go wrong after being asked, something else is everything's going fine, production's running well, buildings are being built well, there's been no issues, no accidents, no calamities. Asking somebody what can go wrong is kind of really a case of like search now for the negatives, the things that haven't happened, the things that could happen, doomsday scenario, what are they? And for some, that's a case of scaremongering. For some, we're looking at trying to come up with problems where there are none. Problems are, before we get to solutions for which there are no problems, we're looking to find the problems which don't exist, which in that moment don't exist, or at that moment have not happened. Once we've identified and we have to work out, well, how bad will that be? So not just what can go wrong, it's what's the worst that can happen with that? How bad will that actually be? Or how often can it happen? How often can people go up a scaffolding without the harnesses they need? How often are they likely to turn up and do something stupid on the forklift? How often are they likely to drive dangerously on the motorway? Hard to answer those questions when nothing has happened. I mean, if you ask Boeing, I'll just go back to the MAX 8s. If you ask Boeing when they launched the MAX 8 and all their test flights all went well because all their pilots knew about the software and all the bits and bobs, you ask Boeing, how bad, what's the likelihood of the plane crashing? They'll say nil. It's a 737. It's one of the big, probably the most widely used aircraft in the world, and all we've done is made a few refinements to it, but the plane itself is the same. So, no, it's a bog standard plane. Nothing unusual in it. I don't know what they have foreseen that the issues that they had were the issues that would happen. It was there was a decision that is not going to be a big issue. Is there a need for action? Clearly, they said no. Not until the aircraft actually crashed and the air traffic or the aviation authorities started grounding planes. Then they sat up and took a bit more notice, and then the whistleblower started off, and the whole lot kind of worms opened. Even as a risk assessment, these are basically, this is the simplest form you can take. Look at your given situation and ask that these questions. What could go wrong? In the operational, if you want to identify the hazards, they're the things that will go wrong. So you ask yourself those questions. That's a great way of bringing out the hazards. When you do identify, you have 4 options. You can terminate them. You can treat them. You can tolerate them, or you can transfer them. 4 T's. Terminate them is to basically, that's it. We're going to make sure they do not happen. Belt and brace is put in place to make sure it doesn't happen. Treat them. We're going to basically do something to lessen them. Tolerate them. We just put up with it. If it happens, it happens. Transfer it, we let somebody else take responsibility. Make it somebody else's task to look after it and to make sure they don't happen. Again, this is all stuff that you've done before, so I won't be spending a lot of time going through this. These are things you'd have heard of. First of all, we're going to start looking at some of the models now, and then we'll look at things like FEMA and some of the others, or FEMEA, or some of the others in next week. So we'll make a start right now. The structured what if is basically it's a very good basic technique. Doesn't require an awful lot of technology. It is a good technique for getting human and organizational factors. It's got structure, and you just keep asking, what if? You need, in most of these assessments, multiple people, professionals, cross-functional. You need people from different areas of the same organization, people impacting, stakeholders impacting the same thing. And this is where we get our what if. What if this? What if that? And as we resolve one, we ask another. It's almost like another aspect that comes up in cause and effect. The 5 whys. Asking somebody the 5 whys. Which is very much like the spoiled children situation where you tell a child they can't have something, but why? Because I said so, but why? What if it's the same? I ask that sort of question in a coaching environment with people. And it is that hazard / risk assessment that we're dealing with here. I'm dealing with somebody who wants to make an improvement or do something different in their career or in their life, in their company. And you ask, when they've come up with an idea, you do what's called an ecology check. And the ecology check is, what if something goes wrong? What else? And once they answer that, what else could happen? And what else? And what else? As that constant checking that will help eliminate. And I actually think it'll help you identify solutions to eliminate. But I actually think there's even something more fundamental in this. I think the fact that that people ask these questions and can use this system, this tool to ask the questions, I think there's the additional benefit that it's just getting people thinking. It's getting people to focus on it. And maybe that's the solution. That is the way we deal with our hazards. We focus on the issues. We focus on the potentials and deal accordingly. It's a cyclical situation. There's a model here from Australia and New Zealand, which it's a very solid one for anybody looking at conducting a hazard analysis or a risk assessment. And it's following a process. One of the biggest steps that we can take when we're looking at any sort of assessment like this is to be very specific, context specific. One of the reasons these things don't work out and people get sick of them and people just don't want to have anything to do with them is we are too vague and broad in the parameters. Risk assessments must be very deep, very, very specific. Again, a piece of advice I got when I was looking at doing my doctoral research was your research must, and it's something I use with all types of research students at this stage. Research should be inch wide, mile deep. Your research needs to be, your investigation needs to be inch wide, mile deep. So you're doing a deep dive on a tiny aspect of a specific context of your topic, of your area. Your hazard analysis research should also be inch wide, mile deep. It's got to be very focused. So we establish a very specific context. And using that specific context, you then identify the risks associated with that context. Otherwise, you're trying to cover too much. The alternative to the inch wide, mile deep parameter is a mile wide and inch deep. And you go to if you're into gardening, you go to your garden and you go an inch deep, you're only scratching the surface. You'll cover your entire garden very quickly, but unless you're growing grass seed, you are not going to, you won't plant a tree on it. Not after digging a hole an inch deep. What we need is we need to be able to really focus in with our searches. And once we get one done, then we go to the next context and then the next. And this is why it takes time. You analyze the risks, the likelihood, the consequence, the level of risks. Every one of them gets treated the same way. Every one of them is a process. From there, you evaluate them. Once you've identified the level of the risks, you evaluate them and work out, is this something that's going to be accepted or treated? All along the way, we are taking communications from stakeholders, people who are involved. If we accept the risk, we then monitor the process to make sure that it's in hand and it's not changing from something that we can tolerate to something that we have to treat. Unfortunately, it is a process that repeats itself and goes on and on and on. And this also is something that tends to turn people off anything to do with hazard analysis or risk assessment because it never goes away. Just because it's being dealt with doesn't mean it's dealt with. It just means that it is in its current state, it is now tolerable. But that could move on. That could become worse. It could become more involved or whatever. So it's something that is an ongoing process that we have to keep looking at. There's a formal recording sheet here that's just an example from a hospital sheet. Remember, this is based on an NHS process. And we'll come across a sheet. I'm not going to go into these in huge detail because we're going to come across these sheets again, this type of sheet again, next week when we look at the FMEA one. But you can see just very quickly across the headings, we have a specific, each sheet is a specific activity which gets filled in on the top. I can circulate it there because I know how to use the pen now. Here's my little red pen. There we go. Specific activity is listed. The details are listed here. We give it a number. And then we fill in all the details and scorings across the sheet. Each record sheet is one specific task, one specific activity. It's not an overall sheet for the department. It's each task within the department. It's each task within the company, within the job, within the function. So it's a very time-consuming situation. And once it's done, all it's going to give you, if I look at the previous one again, all it's going to give us is a decision. I'll put my little highlighter up here too. All it's going to give us is that. Do we accept it or treat it? Or transfer it or whatever, tolerate it? If we accept it, we then get ourselves into the right-hand cycle, where we go all the way back and we check in along the way to make sure it stays that way. If we go to treat it, we communicate that process, we put the new controls in place, and then we monitor it back up the system. We keep in contact with people, and as it changes, situations change, circumstances change, we're back to square one. New staff come on board, new processes come on board. Our worst case scenario, we have everything controlled and something goes wrong. A hazard happens. Then we're back to square one. We're back up, reanalyzing, and we're now in retrospective mode, not proactive mode. Some of the matrices that we can look at here. No, they're used mostly for qualitative, where we score them. When we're using qualitative research on this, we are very much trying to quantify qualitative data. We're trying to give scores to something that is subjective. Because we all phrase things differently. We see certain things as being big issues, and we see certain things as being minor issues, whereas other people will see them other way around. Some people will see it as a huge major issue that something is going if certain thing goes wrong. Other people will see it as just a minor blip, as something, yeah, it just happened. Stuff happens. So when we're put in that situation, we're asking people to score the information in terms of, so that we can quantify it, so that we can fit it in a matrix. It makes it a little bit, I always find it makes it a little bit more subjective, a little bit more of a problem. And that is something that I sometimes find difficult to square as a personal situation. I find it difficult to put credibility in some of this stuff, being honest. I know you guys are using it all the time, so from your perspective, you're used to you're using this all the time. You probably found a way to make it a bit more realistic, or it gives you something to work with. It gives you that starting point to work with. When the subjectivity comes into it, I start to get a bit worried that decisions are being made based on opinion, and people's opinions vary about the same thing. But we use it all the time. We constantly use this approach. We have a matrix there where looking at combining the frequency, likelihood, or probability with the consequence, the severity, and the impact. We try to use a scoring system that would position each item that we look at, or each item we assess. We try to position it somewhere in this matrix. Somewhere where we want them to the left, lower left, at the meeting of the X and Y axis. That's where we want it, because that means that there's a low consequence and a low frequency. But there are those companies then that will say, well, if it's down in the green all the time, it means we're not pushing hard enough. That we need to have some probability, high probability that it will happen, and some severe impact in order to keep the juices flowing, so to speak. To get the blood pumping. Sounds like a silly reason, but it is a reason. Because if it all stays down the green, low issue, low worries, we end up with complacency. Because nothing will go wrong, nothing's going wrong. So where do we go then? How do we strike the balance here? How do we use this matrix again? Stuff that you would probably have used in the past, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through it. Um, Identifying the hazards, specific hazard, specific event, determining the risks, using the matrix. So you assess the event scenario consequence, you assess the event scenario likelihood, and determine the risk, and place it on the grid. On the matrix here on the right, you can see, go up one more. We have the likelihood on the vertical, and we have the consequence on the horizontal at the bottom. This is for patient safety. So we're looking at something that's going to happen greater than 1 in 10 people, 1 in 10 patients per year. And if there's one or more fatalities, that's the top right in the matrix, is high risk. In other words, you have more than 1 in 10 patients in the year will have a fatality, will die from the actions or from the treatments or from the procedures. That's a high risk, high hazard, big issue. If it's more than 1 in 10 patients per year, but a very low patient safety issue, that's classed as medium. So under the case of where there's more than 1 in 10 patients affected in the year, then the lowest category, the lowest score it can get is medium. Contrast that with the green stage, where it's less than 1 in a million per patient per year, and it's a low, very low, negligible issue, then that's considered low. Ideally, in a hospital situation, we want everything down in 1A. The first thing I noticed when I looked at this diagram was 1A is not perfect. There is still, maybe less than 1 in a million, but there is still the risk that something can go wrong. And it's not that there is no patient safety risk, it's that it is negligible or very low. It is still there. It's still there as a potential risk, because nothing can be eliminated completely. Well, sorry, very little can be eliminated completely. The only way we can really take things out completely is to not do anything. Everybody stays away. We don't work with each other. We don't do anything. We want to stop people falling off of scaffolding. Don't put people on scaffoldings. You want to stop people getting their arms stuck in machines. Don't put them anywhere near. Don't put people anywhere near machines. You want to stop people dying of the wrong medication. Don't give them the wrong medication. It's very difficult to eliminate all risk. It's impossible to eliminate all risk. Or should we say it's impractical to eliminate all risk, all hazards. But we certainly can do better to analyze, to find them. The matrix is just basically a way we can analyze and assess the consequences. What we'll end up doing if we're looking at a matrix is we will end up identifying what is the acceptable level of risk. What is the acceptable level of the hazard? What are we happy to put up with? That's what we will look at. Some things we will want to be down at 1A, bottom left-hand corner. This is our, do we tolerate it? Do we treat it? Do we terminate it? Or what? Or do we transfer it? Where the position comes is what we look at. What are we happy to accept? And this goes across all situations in all business. One of the things I researched in my first master's was around customer service, and something at the time I always thought we were all out to give customers the best service we could. Companies make strategic decisions as to whether they will work with give all customers the same service level or not. They will come along and they will offer their better customers, their higher value customers, 100% service level. They will not offer all customers that. Because it's not practical. They can't do it. They can't deliver that service. So now we have kind of the risk within the risk. We have the risk of not giving people the service ever, but now we have the acceptance that we are making a decision that the right people are going to get the service we want and the others are not. It just makes it a bit more fun. The complexity grows upon it. Do we overcomplicate things? Quite possibly. As we try to eliminate everything? Yeah. I think we do. In some cases, I think we do. So we position using the matrix. It's more than just scoring and grading and positioning our issues, the risks, the assessments we find. It's more than just positioning them in the right place or satisfying ourselves that we have it positioned somewhere within that spectrum. It's once it's in that place, what are we going to do about it? Step one is just assessing the risk. Step one is just gauging the process, gauging it. Step two is actually doing something about it. We have to be somewhat objective here. This point in this thing is a common error to match event likelihood with worst case outcome, which only happens in a minority of events. We kind of over dramatize, maybe we over sensationalize to make things, well, what if it is worse than that? Then we have to deal with that. So the fact that risk is much smaller. It's a very complex environment here. Once we do get something aligned, that's again, as I said, the start of the process, because from there we have to pilot it or plot it, and pilot as some sort of a management of it. Because The matrix is only the starting point. We have the decision process that comes out of it. If it's a low risk hazard or low risk issue, we might evaluate it as tolerable, and we'll say, right, we won't do anything. We don't have to do anything to protect it. We'll just deal with it. It's not a big issue. It is within our parameters of what we will consider tolerable. But they will change as business models change, as business needs change. The need for protective equipment, the need for sanitizer, the need for masks. They would have had low risk situation in the early part of COVID, and they very quickly became big risk. Something that had to be done urgently. It had to be done everywhere in totality. If it's something that's evaluated as intolerable, then we have to take some sort of reduction steps. Either reduce it to medium or low, or just take steps to eliminate it. And a medium is where we have to start looking at something else. LARP is one of the ones mentioned earlier on. I think from medium to high, we have to generally take some sort of step to try and reduce it to low, or eliminate it completely, or at least maintain a more significant watching brief. We should never just walk away and say it'll be fine. But it will vary, and it will change. Even when we mark it one way, score it one way, it's going to change. It will change with business needs. It will change as a project unfolds. It will change as economic climate changes. It will change for any one of a myriad of reasons. And heightening a further escalation of tensions between America and China. Weather balloon shot down today, posturing in international waters. I was watching a documentary last week about the Queen Elizabeth, the aircraft carrier, who are on kind of their maiden trip, and they're heading for the China Sea for inverted commas maneuvers, also to be a show of force, and they're also looking after things off Iraq. And they're constantly reassessing a situation between Russian naval vessels getting close, getting within their operation zone, and there's a general rule that they can't get within a certain distance, but they're getting closer, so they're sending other boats in to try and push her off, to block their view. They're sending planes overhead, fighters, so they're testing reaction times. They're sending radar planes or surveillance planes in low to take photographs of it. There's all sorts of steps going on and things being done, and all of those change the views, change the risks, change the game. And it's not just in military circles we find these things. We find the exact same situation happening in business. Suppliers are doing, our customers and competitors are doing things that are changing the game plan. One of my go-to examples is Apple. Nokia were king of the heap in terms of phones and BlackBerry, they were kings of the heap in terms of phones since the inception of the phone, mobile phone, until the new pretender turns up, Apple, with this concept called a smartphone. And all of a sudden it opens up a whole new industry. And as was evident, Nokia didn't react. They didn't see it as a high risk. It's a flash in the pan. It's a gimmick. It's not going to last like people thought of the car. It's a toy for the rich and famous. It'll never amount to anything. IBM CEO in the 40s who believed the world will only need 5 computers. So what would we want to develop computers for? Nobody's going to want one. We need 5 in the entire world. I've got more than that within reach right now. It's these things have to change. Our evaluation and decision making, bearing in mind that our decision making is based on our risk evaluation, our hazard evaluation. You as a health and safety manager might decide, hang on a second, we're shutting this site down because people aren't adhering or aren't compliant with the health and safety rules. We might have to shut the whole thing down for that until people cop themselves on and get on with it and do it right. That's a decision just been taken based on the risk evaluation. You hear of things closing because it's too risky. They'll close a public amenity if there's a storm coming in because it's too unsafe to use it or to be there. They'll try to close down our piers and our coastal areas when there's a storm coming in because people are essentially, call what it is, stupid, and think they can go walk out a pier with waves crashing over it. There's actually a whole sport or a whole new thing being developed or has developed. And I've seen it with families doing videos of it, with young kids walking along a pier. And as the waves break over, they cower down for the waves to break on top of them or crash down on them, get up and move again till the next wave comes in. And that's considered fun. Yet the wave is breaking over them, and just beyond where the wave is breaking, it's just open water. So they could quite easily, especially young children, standing in the wrong place, the rocks that they're standing on get wet, they could get washed in. The risk evaluation decision making isn't necessarily good, but councils tried to shut down the barricade those quays, those piers, like out in Dún Laoghaire, they'll try and block off the pier to stop people walking out them in bad weather because people want to come and see the waves. Just as an example, just to kind of come to the end of what we're going to do today. Any sort of a new IT system can increase productivity and can help eradicate errors. But if you don't take into consideration human factors, they can increase errors. At the end of the day, it's a machine. It's going to be used by people. And if people aren't on board and aren't aware of it, or we haven't accounted for that, then it might be a complete waste of time. And there could be new errors come in because we hadn't factored in an element. It really is a case of hazard analysis, risk assessment really is a case of doomsday approach on things. And it does make it difficult. in what we do. In the Airbus A320, there was this new class cockpit came into play. Fly by wire, state of the art technology. Multifunction displays with a lot of the pages looking very similar. And actually, I've watched a number of these air crash investigation programs that are on TV, and it amazes me with these high tech designs that cost billions that they get it so wrong. That a warning light is a warning issue, or whether something is important is on or off. It's just a tiny little tick box on the corner of a screen. It's a little arrow, or it's a little changing color from green to blue. And it's not a vibrant green to a vibrant blue, it's just a green to blue, which in some cases can look very similar. They've had situations proven where a pilot's footrest is right beside a button that will disengage something like the autopilot. But the plane will not announce it's disengaged the autopilot. It just turns off an abbreviated something like AP on a corner of a screen. So unless you're actually watching for it, you won't see it happen. And all you've done is rest your foot. In actual fact, your foot can block the screen, if I remember rightly. There's this one here of a plane that crashed, killing 87 people in Strasbourg. It was a new error. And it was down to the way that the new screens were set up. They were supposed to fly a little bit further and then join the glide scope into the airport, to the runway, but then cross over a mountain first. And they came down too sharp. And it's down to the way the machine was set up. The machine layout was different, and it's a tiny set of switches and buttons. I've gone to the cockpit of large aircraft. I had the pleasure of being able to take my tour of one while I was lecturing in Lufthansa Technik for SCTU. And I always knew they were complex machines. And I know they're duplicated systems. So they look more complex than they potentially are once you get into it. But the people who are flying these planes have hundreds, if not thousands, of hours of flight time in that aircraft. And for them to make this error, to select a mode, but to select the wrong mode, and then put in a figure plus 33, which essentially puts the aircraft into a nosedive into a mountain because it's new. The system is new and they're not fully off air with it. They're not full up to speed with it. And they don't realize what can go wrong. By the time they do realize, it's too late. They're in the mountain. It's a scary situation when we break it down. Unfortunately. From a patient situation, this comes from the University of Nottingham. an allergy alert may not be generated. There's a book or series of books used by the pharmaceutical sector called the Pharmacopoeia. And if I remember rightly, it from a past life, it's released. It's a multi-volume document or multi-volume book system, but as far as I know, it's released a couple of times a year to everybody involved in pharmaceuticals, which updates allergen information for patients or for all medications. All medications. I have been with my GP and I've seen him go through a book that looks like a dictionary and reading down through it and oh yeah, I can't give you that, but I can okay, I can give you this one instead. So I have seen it being used in my GPs. I'm assuming it's used everywhere. But the whole concept here is that if a new allergy is recognized from a medication, a new set of parameters, that's a new risk. How do we get that information out for people, GPs, pharmacists, people involved in that area? How do we get everybody to understand what the current lay of the land is? How do we manage hazard alert? A hazard alert in this situation, these guys found, is generated every third prescription, and it just takes one button to override that. And there's no audit trail as to who's cancelling the message. So in other words, it is possible to turn off a warning that is necessary for people. The warning of a hazard. Same thing has been found in a number of aviation issues where a warning is going off and the pilot pulls the circuit breaker. They pull the circuit breaker, they pull the fuse basically to stop the alarm going off, rather than actually dealing with it or reporting it. People aren't always aware. This again, as I say, comes from a hospital, so people aren't always aware, or the safety functionality is not activated. So any contraindications, which is a form of allergen, are not passed on. They're not informed. Hazards are generated by drop-down menus on computers, which happens in a lot of organizations now. We work off computer-based systems or app-based systems, which require us to complete and select from drop-down menus. You know, sometimes we're doing this on our phone or on a tablet, and if we hit the wrong button, click the wrong thing, it disappears, and we don't actually know that we've made the wrong decision, the wrong selection. It just does what it does. Because once you've made the selection, that's it, it's gone. It moves on to the next menu. The people who set it up in such a way that it moves on to the next menu so that you can actually do what you do quickly. You can work through your process very quickly. And sometimes when it comes to technology, and we all now work with technology of all descriptions, some people aren't good with technology. And that in itself is a hazard. You're dealing with, in the medical profession, as this example is running on, you're dealing with medical people who are excellent at their job as medical practitioners. But you may have an aging population of GPs. And the aging population of GPs may not be very tech savvy. And they will tell you that they don't have time to go and reskill in how to use all the computer mumbo jumbo. Because that's not their job. Their job is medicine. They have enough trouble trying to stay up to date with the medical situation than to be worrying about all this other stuff. So this in itself, this is found by a hospital. This in itself are the hazards that are there and the systems that are designed. Using the systems creates the hazards. It's eliminating the potential for error, but it's not taking into consideration the fact that not everybody is as up to date as we'd like them to be. Creates a problem. So if we want to ensure in this situation here safe operation and for health and safety for medicine, we have to ensure that all our processes and our systems are well designed and thoroughly risk assessed. So whatever you're trying to do, if you want people wearing harnesses on a scaffolding, you want people wearing steel cap boots or ear protectors or taking whatever precautions they need in any process. The recommendations, the processes must be well designed, thinking of the human aspect, the people who are not robots and follow a computerized program, if this, then that. They are people who are caught up in other stuff, other distractions, other things going on. So it has to be something that's user friendly, has to be more intuitive, has to make wrong decisions difficult. So it has to make it difficult to actually break the situation. I've seen it actually, the best place I've seen it, because they're useless here in Ireland for it. Here in Carlow, we have a number of places in the town where there's no right turn, and it's abused left, right, and centre. You see people turning right where they're supposed to be not turning right all the time. Just ignore it. And it's not policed. In France, you come off a ferry, they know there's a lot of people coming in from Europe into northern France, and they're going to come off the ferry, and they have to learn to drive on the other side of the road. They have to learn to approach a roundabout in the other direction. So instead of going to a roundabout and going left or clockwise around the roundabout, we have to approach a roundabout and go anti-clockwise around the roundabout. So they have to educate people as soon as they come off the boat or off the train in the Channel Tunnel to know exactly what they need to do. Otherwise, they're going to have cars going down the wrong side of the motorways at 130 kilometers an hour, and there will be carnage. And they've put steps in place to ensure that those hazards are minimized. And I've actually seen, when we were coming back from France at one point, I used to come back through Roscoff to Cork, and I've seen that situation and how that works. It was quite an elderly couple, got off the ferry, coming in from, I think, came in from England, in their car, got to the roundabout leaving the port. So I didn't even they're just getting out of the port, got to the roundabout coming out of the port where they would join the main road. There's a roundabout, or there was a roundabout. And they forgot what they were doing and went to go left and go clockwise around the roundabout. And the car mounted the pavement or mounted up over the curb, but the curb wouldn't hold the width of the car or the length of the car. So they actually beached the car on the pavement. Front wheels were hanging off the front of the pavement and the back wheels were hanging off the back of the pavement, and as the belly of the car was just sitting on the pavement. In other words, you get this far, you realize that you shouldn't have gone any further. By that stage, you're stuck. You will not be a hazard to any other motorists. You're just going to have to sit there till a rescue comes along and get you back off the pavement. Problem solved. They made it difficult to go wrong. You can't do it the wrong way. You have to do it this way. makes the correct actions easier. If you slow down, you will have to. The road is curved in a certain way in that situation, so you have to follow. If you go on that road, these people weren't paying attention. They just got to the roundabout and decided, oh, that's it. The roundabout coming, better be swinging left. It should also be easier to find the error. Well, there's a car stuck on the pavement. That's a fairly good error. We need to be able to do these things to make it as easy as possible. People need to be able to see that there's an error. People need to be able to see that this thing isn't the right isn't correct. Something needs to happen. And it's got to be a certain amount intuitive, but it's got to be very much something that's led by the fact that rather than having it being policed by the inverted commas doom and gloom merchants of health and safety managers, it's got to be something that people will realize very quickly. Oops, I shouldn't have done that because it's not letting me go any further. You know, kind of a case of after a couple of attempts, it shuts your system down. You can't go any further. It's like trying to get into a system if you can't remember your password. 3 attempts and it locks you out. And therefore you have to get IT to come in and reset your system and whatever. Just the last one I'm going to do today. Just to highlight this document for you, which goes on the National Patient Safety Association or Agency website. It's dealing with risk assessments for hospitals at night, which is the dangerous place because lower staff, tiredness. We're not used to work. People aren't. Even if you do work nights, you're not used to it. It's a weird feeling. I have worked nights. I loved it, but it takes a bit of getting used to. But also, you know, in the hospital situation, and bear in mind this presentation is very much focused on a hospital situation. On a hospital situation, you know, your wards are darker to help people sleep, to allow people to sleep, so things are quieter, toned down. There's less people to ask, to check with. You know, you can't pick the phone up in the ward and ring somebody. It's you're out there a patient is awake at 2 o'clock in the morning in extreme pain. For the safety and the comfort of the other patients, you want to quieten down the ill patient quickly, but you also want to completely you want to get the right product, the right medication. So that report is there if anybody wants to use it as a bit of backup or just an extra bit of information. I'm going to park it there. We'll have 20 odd slides to do next Monday on the 13th, which will just be dealing with models themselves. I hope that's a little bit interesting for you. Thank you very much, and apologies for the hiccup earlier on. They've all gone quiet now for me, which is good. I enjoy your bank holiday, and I will talk to you all on the 13th as normal. Take care.